Thank you very much, Mark, and the SPRITE team for inviting our team to present today. So the title of this talk is Digital Product Passports, Unintended Consequences for Human Digital Identity, a scoping study. So this project came out of our successful funding, thank you again, from the SPRITE Sandpit that was held back in January 2023. And the theme of that Sandpit was digital identity created, remembered, forgotten. The project that we pitched and received funding from the SPRITE Sandpit was on the topic of EU digital product passports, and we called our project and our team DigiProPass from that phrase. This was the team. I'm a criminologist based at the School of Law in Edinburgh. The PI was Bianca Slocum, who's from the Centre for Trust, Peace and Social Relations at Coventry University. Anna Chatzimiscali is in the Department of Mechanical Engineering at the University of Bath. We were very lucky to benefit from Theo Marinopoulos, who was finishing a PhD in prosthetic limbs at the time, and Alan Hodgson, who has his own consultancy and has a background in secure documents, including passports and credentials. So this was our team. So the context behind it is, I think, a few underlying big trends I just wanted to mention briefly. One is arguably a trend that's underway from physical credentials to digital credentials. Physical credentials have for hundreds of years been printed documents, seals, authorizations, which give the holder certain entitlements. Today we know that all sorts of digital credentials, including passports, credentials are starting to digitize. There's the little icon at the bottom of this passport which shows that there's an RFID chip within the passport, and that allows, of course, for easy scanning and for pulling up the holder's record. But I think a second big initiative and push that's happening around the world today is a move towards supporting, enhancing the circular economy. And this, of course, is the idea that instead of buying goods and products and discarding them when we think maybe they're at end of life, with all of the wasteful consequences that flow, instead there are all sorts of ways in which goods can be repaired or fixed or repurposed, or their components can be found new useful purposes. And supporting the circular economy is a challenge, I think, for societies, but we can see initiatives across different parts of the world to try to make that happen and to anticipate how best to support it. And one such initiative, which was really just sort of becoming public and becoming known about at the time that we were starting our project in early 2023, was as an EU initiative to launch what they call digital product passports. And the idea is that these passports will be something like a QR code or maybe a barcode or something else which identifies a specific product, and it will be possible for a consumer or indeed a retailer or a purchaser or someone involved in recycling to be able to scan the code which is physically attached to that item and learn about its the identity of that product, its provenance, but also certain other information about what it contains, whether it has dangerous chemicals or toxic materials inside it, and possibly also information about its chain of ownership or about whether or not that's been repaired or modified during its lifetime. So this is an initiative which will launch with a relatively small number of product categories, but is expected then to expand considerably afterwards. And amongst the categories, just to give you an idea of the scope of this that could be included, could be car batteries, vehicles, textiles, electronics, furniture, chemicals. And this is part of a long number of directives and regulations and initiatives which are currently happening at EU level. It seems likely, we think, that the UK will be affected despite Brexit, just simply because of the extent of its trading and of the likely implementation by retailers across products sold into the UK, simply because it will be more cost effective than trying to distinguish between those and products sold into the EU. And as I said, items will be identified via a QR code, a barcode, or an NFC chip. And interestingly, although this is being driven by the EU institutions and by the member states, large technology companies are involved in designing and implementing the infrastructure. So the back infrastructure that's going to be used to support this. So I thought I'd just give the example of electric vehicles, because that's one of the categories that is going to be first up in being involved in this initiative. And of course, when one charges an electric car, you're charging the battery inside. Usually this is a very large battery. It sits typically at the bottom of the vehicle. And as batteries become used, they degrade over time in terms of their storage capacity and their performance. So it seems likely that over a period of years, we'll start to see a second-hand market in electric vehicle batteries. This is a very costly component of electric vehicles. And it's important, if you're buying a battery on a second-hand market, to know how old it is, what the provenance of that battery is, because clearly that's going to affect its price and its value, but also how you might need to treat it and to use it. So if we just, again, take the case of electric vehicle batteries, indeed it seems highly desirable to support the sustainability of a secondary market in the batteries, but also to support their flow through different parts of the consumer system, to be able to check its authenticity, that it's a genuine battery, the age and maybe its use history, to check its maintenance history, to check that any aftermarket battery for an electric vehicle is from where it purports to come from. And of course, the EU probably has an agenda where it wishes to ensure that products coming into the EU have been manufactured to EU standards. So we therefore need a way to check the identity, the provenance and the history of each battery or each item. So the research questions that we had, or we were interested in knowing about, were, well, how's this system going to work? It sounds as though it has a noble principle behind it, but in practice, will such a scheme inadvertently introduce challenges to users' privacy and security? What kind of data is going to be stored in the digital product database? Is it going to be very thin, simply a serial number and a place of manufacture and that's it? Or will it actually contain data identifying current and previous owners and users and product usage? Will it be possible to combine digital product passport data with data from other databases to make inferences about users' lifestyles and identities? For example, car manufacturers typically now through remote sensors collect all sorts of data about car usage, about how it's driven, where it's driven. So would it be possible for a car manufacturer to be able to begin to combine some of this data to learn more about who's been where and what they've been doing? Are there particular concerns for users and groups who operate in secure environments? What sort of risks arise when products are voluntarily entered into the circular economy? And are there cybersecurity risks of hacking of data? So if those were some of the sort of narrower questions, the overall project aims and objectives were to, I suppose, better understand some of the emerging implications at the intersection of physical items and human digital identities, to engage relevant stakeholders who have expertise in privacy, security and ethical design, as well as in sustainability, and to see if we could come up with some policy that might proactively inform and mitigate any potential harms that might inadvertently be introduced as a consequence of these product passports. So what we decided to do was a small-scale scoping study, which we thought would be feasible in the short time that we had available to us. And what we did was basically break it down into two halves, if you like. The first one was to do a literature review and to try to understand better what was already known in the literature, not only about digital product passports, but about some cognate areas and previous the product and system releases where unintended privacy, security or ethical consequences flowed as a result. And then secondly, we undertook interviews. We were able to undertake 10 interviews, so it's not a very large number, but we had a great range of different people who agreed to speak to us, including people who worked in policy making, people who were experts in cybersecurity and technology, and people who were academic experts in the field. And we had 3 research questions that we sought to answer. The first one was, what are the current considerations about privacy related to digital product passports, either intended or unintended? And to what extent has the possibility of making inferences about users been considered as part of this initiative development? The second research question was to what extent these issues might already be covered or mitigated by existing legislation such as GDPR, or what might be missing. And the third one was to ask what might be the perceived barriers or incentives or solutions to addressing potential issues proactively, and are there lessons that we can learn from analogous previous experiences or cases. So what were our findings? Well, as I said, we had 10 interviewees. Unfortunately, we approached a number of companies and organisations who were working directly on DPP development, and unfortunately, they didn't agree to participate in our study. But of the interviewees who did agree, in response to research question 1, our interviewees identified a wide range of potential risks and harms, including the capacity to combine passport data with other data to make inferences about behaviour, but also about someone's identity. They were concerned about things such as function creep or mission creep, about how criminal investigators might seek to obtain data from either digital product passports or some of the databases that we believe companies that are seeking to develop these systems may be interested in sort of bolting on or piggybacking. And they also noted the potential for AI to be able to infer personal information from data that on the surface you might think only relates to specific products. In relation to research question 2, there were mixed responses. Interviewees discussed what they regarded as a grey area between product data and personal data. And the interviewers from different backgrounds had sort of different perspectives that they brought, but I think many of them emphasised the complexity of data processing and how data which might appear not to have any consequences for someone's privacy or identity or their security, when combined with other data, might begin to reveal quite personal or sensitive things about individuals. And in the third question, many of the interviewees had difficulty answering the question that we asked, but the main reason for that seemed to be, at least at the time that we were conducting our research, there was relatively little in the public domain. We scoured the EU institution databases and websites, and we were able to find kind of formal announcement of this initiative, but it was very hard to find details on what the architecture or the system design was going to be. There was a little bit on the websites of private companies who were part of consortia involved in developing it, but it wasn't very clear actually which data was going to be collected as a result. And perhaps it's worth noting that one expert mentioned that they drew a distinction between two previous technologies. One, household smart meter technology, which, whatever one might think of that technology, was developed with a privacy-led approach and explicitly involved making trade-offs between the granularity of data, which might be useful for environmental efficiency while respecting and preserving user privacy. But on the other hand, we know from Internet of Things devices on the kind of mass consumer market that many of them have compromised users' privacy in all sorts of ways, even if that's been unlawful within the EU and the UK. And we don't perhaps yet know which route DPPs will take. The kind of the mood music that's coming out of the companies and the EU is that this will be very privacy protecting, but we'll have to see how that pans out in reality. And so just beginning to wrap up some of the outputs that we have from our project. We completed a paper manuscript which is based on the literature review and the interviews. That's a 10,000 word paper, and we plan to submit it to a suitable journal or conference. But we've also leveraged our colleague Alan Hodgson's connections with the secure document industry, for which he consults and has a very good relationship. And they're interested in what's happening in this area because they envisage that there will be parallel developments in all sorts of areas where there's a transition from sort of physical tracking of things in the world to digital tracking of them. And Alan's written 3 articles for ID and secure document use, which is part of the trade press. And earlier than this year, he gave a presentation, which I understand was well received in Lisbon for the Optical and Digital Document Security Conference.